Welcome back, Wol. Today we're gonna go ahead and start talking about the query parameters. Now, they go into the address bar as well. You've seen them before, of that I assure you. Maybe you have not noticed them, but if you have used any of the search engines out there, you will have noticed that you will have seen that there are query parameters and you might have not noticed them. So if I open up the browser, and if I just, I don't know, go ahead and type something in, well, not in the browser, but in the search engine, just, I don't know, whatever, you will see up here it says search and then a question mark after the search, and then the parameters begin. I don't know. First of all, you have the query, whatever, and you have the encoding. And honestly, okay, client is Firefox, so that's my browser, and I have no idea what these other are. Well, the person who created it knows what they all are, but not me. Anyway, those are the query parameters, and based upon those query parameters, you can determine for example, how many listings would you like to have per a page? So I don't have a lot of listings here, maybe 10 or something like that. But if you alter the parameters, you can have maybe 50 or 100 or something like that. Same goes for pretty much any website out there. It functions in pretty much the same way. So they do not alter or affect the routes, but they do affect the data they can affect the data within the components and how the components are displayed. So if you want to, as I said, if you want to have 10 results per page or 50 results or something like that, once you change your settings, your query route parameters will your query parameters will actually change as well. You can put a lot of things in the query parameters, like what names will be displayed, how will it, depending on your settings, how will the settings reflect the site, etc. So let us go ahead and begin. The first thing that you need to do is create a transaction folder. So like this. You have it from the previous tutorial. So just in the transaction folder, just realize that in the transaction folder, you need to go ahead and create all these files. You can go ahead and create them one by one with me, or you can, as I explain them, or you can just go ahead and create all of the ones that are actually green here, and then we can populate them with code together. So either way, but you will need all of these. The first one that we will do here is transaction routes.ts. So that's the one that I have opened here. So it is very similar to accounts.routes.ts. Here we will simply define the route for transaction and its subroutes. That's really it. There's very little new material here. So this is just another, basically just another set of routes for another component. So the first one, router config, basically this is needed for the creation of the transaction, and you will there's the transaction.routes.ts router config export routes router config. Okay, so anyway, there are just a few. I just looked at my notes and something was really confusing. Anyway, this create component here should not be confused with the create component in the. You see, it's actually create.component. It should not be confused with the one in the accounts. So here we have create.component.ts. It has nothing to do with that one. It has the same name, true, but it has nothing to do with that one. Actually, we will create the create.component here. So right here, it will actually be created. And we need to basically just move this. Well, no. Right. Anyway, there's no need to like do anything with it except if you, for example, have a wrong path here. You need to have this path, so it cannot lead it cannot go from anywhere else. So the dot states that it begins from the current directory, so from the transactions, and it is going straight to the create.component, so it is going to be looking for the create.component within the transaction folder. So it is necessary for it to be there. Otherwise, if you go from root, this is going to be problematic. Anyway, the first one, router config, well, this is just needed for the configuration of the routes. And the transaction component, this is basically our parent component inside of which we will have the subroutes of our components, basically of all the components listed down below. So we'll have the subroutes, and the subroutes are basically the child routes. So you have children here, and then you create the subroutes. Anyway, we will go ahead and create a variable, so routes, and we're going to go ahead and export it so we can utilize it elsewhere, and we will make it a const in order to state that no further change will be done, or no further changes will be possible. Down below you have path, which is basically just transactions. That is the main route, and the component that is shown with that main route is a transaction component. Down below, we have the children routes or the subroutes, or you wish to refer to them, well, subroutes. And here you have a path, which is basically create, and then you have a component which is to be shown, and it is create component, which we have imported from here. And when you go to this child route, your URL will look something like this. So /transactions/create. If you just go to transactions, well, you just eliminate the create and you get transactions. That's pretty much it in that regard. So not much new stuff here in general. Next up, we need to go into the app routes. So right here. approutes.ts, and there isn't much new here either. So we're just gonna basically import routes, and they will be imported as transaction routes. That is how they will be referred to here, and that is how they are referred to down below. So we have added this line here. And here we will use the spread operator once again. This is the triple dot. All it does is takes this array, takes all of its elements, and puts all of its elements into this array, basically. Simple as that. So these are just transaction routes. So you see this second line here of the array, and once you import things from here, you're just going to get another one like that, and another one like that, and another one like that, etc. So we're just importing the routes and nothing else really. Next up is the transaction.component.ts. So let me just find it, transaction.component.ts. Here it's, yes, this is a new file, but we haven't done anything new here. So we've imported the router directives because we're going to need them for the router outlets, which we're going to use in our HTML code. You just specify the template URL, which is the transaction.component.html. That is another file which you actually need to make. And you will also need a class down here. You can just leave it empty. If you go to the component .html, this here will be shown regardless of the subroutes. So just header to transactions, and you have the router outlet where the contents of the components will be placed and then displayed with respect to the subroutes that are requested. So keep that in mind. Anyway, gonna bid you farewell here, and we shall see each other in the follow-up tutorial.